Welcome back to The Move. We're vibing through the book 10 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Justin Koo, and in today's episode, we're talking about that time in the Bible where Abraham talks to a priest who apparently doesn't have a mom or a dad. If you're wondering, what in the world am I talking about? That's Genesis chapter 14, verses 17 to 24. My guest is the one and only, maybe you would call him a priest if he was part of a different religion, Jonathan Leonardo.
Stop it. You getting no priest, man. Yeah.
Father Jonathan Leonardo.
Oh,
No, that's
gosh.
even worse.
The Reverend Dr. Good Brother.
Yeah, there you go. It's interesting how different faiths have different approaches to the names, and it's like, I don't know, why is that?
I don't know, man. I mean, I'd prefer just to be called Jonathan most of the time. But
You would be opposed to being called the Honorable?
there's only one who is honorable, man.
So, Melchizedek is the person who we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah.
Apparently, Abram has just come back from a battle. He comes and meets this guy called Melchizedek.
Yeah.
He tries to give him a bunch of money, and the guy's like, no, I wouldn't even take your shoes, bro, which is where the title of the episode comes from. I don't want those shoes, bro. This is an interesting story for context. Back when I was doing That Christian Vlogger, and I would do question and answer sessions, and I do live streams and things like that fairly regularly. One question would happen all the time, and I never knew what to say.
Yeah.
And it was always a question on the idea of who is Melchizedek. And I'm like, dude, Melchizedek's a priest. He's like this king figure. Like, I get there's this story here with Abraham, but I was always confused as to why it mattered so much. And so I was maybe wondering if we could take a step back and you can give us the bigger picture as to why Melchizedek is a figure of interest for a lot of Christians. Yes, we're going to talk about the story, but there's other things that happen in the New Testament that make this person a person of interest.
Yeah. When you get to the letter of Hebrews, right? I don't know if I mentioned this before, but one writer talking about Hebrews said that he likes to refer to the author of Hebrews as the pastor.
Oh,
right? Because he feels that Hebrews is a sermon. It's
Okay.
an extended sermon. I really like that. So the pastor in Hebrews, right? Paul. The pastor in Hebrews highlights Melchizedek as a type, an antitype to Christ in his ministry, right? So Christ serves in the duality of two offices, which he is both king and priest. And we have a better priesthood now and a greater king. And he is in the person of Jesus. The author of Hebrews, the pastor, refers to Melchizedek and uses Melchizedek as this sort of framing tool. We call it a type, right? Theologically, Melchizedek is a type of the one who is to come. And there are several elements of Melchizedek's life that draw a sort of a line to Christ in the book of Hebrews. And here's one of them, is that Genesis is a book of genealogies.
Right.
Genesis is a book of family lineage and histories. It's a book of biological relationships being strained under the weight of sin. It's a book of infighting amongst those who are related to one another. And the book of Genesis catalogs those relationships in a family tree of sorts in series of genealogies that are given. Melchizedek, he's this emblematic figure, this mysterious figure who has no genealogy.
Every time someone is introduced in the book of Genesis, son of, father
There's some
of,
connection.
something like
Yeah. Even Abraham, son of like Terah, right? Like Melchizedek's just there.
Hey, yo, what's
He
up?
just shows up.
Hi, guys.
He's kind of like that dusty figure out in
The Wild Wild West.
Yeah, you see him in the horizon and he comes into focus. That's Melchizedek. And he comes in this dual office of he is king of Salem, right? Which is the precursor to Jerusalem, right? And he's also
Salem.
Priest of the Most High. Like he works as a king priest or a priest king. And then his name is rather interesting. There is a long going debate on how to actually make sense of his name. But if you were to take at least some of the indicators in the name, you could derive from his name Melchi, which is my king. Melech in Hebrew is king. So Melchi with the suffix is it's personalized, my king. And then Zedek is the noun for righteousness. So my king, it could be my king is righteous, right? Or it could be my king is righteousness, right? And you see this, or king of righteousness, right? These are some variations on Melchizedek, what they could understand. So you have this figure who has no genealogy, and in having no genealogy, he has no beginning. And then the way he disappears, he has no ending. All right. So he has no beginning, no ending. He is both king and priest, and he is a king of righteousness that is the king priest in the city of peace. Shalom, right? Salem. So he's the king of peace, who is the king of righteousness. And then it's very interesting. Have you ever noticed what he comes bearing?
No, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, if you go to Genesis 14, he comes bearing something. He actually gives something to Abram.
Oh, interesting. Bread
and wine.
Wow.
Right? So as this king of righteousness, who is also the priest of God upon high, king and priest in the city of peace, he brings bread and wine to give to he who holds the promise of the seed that is to come, who is righteousness himself, who will one day be the king and priest of God and will sit on the throne of David in the city of peace.
Interesting.
So Melchizedek and everything he represents is meeting Abraham, and within Abraham's loins is the fulfillment of the antitype that Melchizedek embodies.
I'm getting the whole Spider-Man meme vibes where they're pointing at each other, and they're Melchizedek and Abraham are pointing at each other, and they're one and the same and yet still different.
That's
so interesting.
Yeah, you have all of this at play. So then
I know that this isn't part of the point of this passage, but do you think, because in Genesis we've already met seemingly supernatural figures in the sense that like Enoch had no end in that he walked with God. Is Melchizedek maybe one of these kind of like divine figures, or is it just the narrative is instructing us to think in this way?
Yeah, very much. I think the latter, more importantly, that the text is very much enchanted.
Okay.
The assumption of the text is that you have men and women speak to supernatural serpentine figures.
Sure.
You have
Pharaoh who talks to the
Pharaoh who talks to God.
Yeah.
You have God who sneaks up on people and whispers to them in the middle of the night. You have, celestial promises that we now take for granted, a rainbow.
Sure.
Right. You have miracles and supernatural occurrings contrary to nature, which according to the text, that's what rain was. Right? It had not rained yet in the land, right? Rain is this brand new thing, because prior to that, the land had been been
lush from the garden.
It was lush, and it was always what's the word I'm looking for here? When you water ground,
fertile. It
had been watered. Maybe that's the verb.
It was
right?
Moist.
It was watered by dew.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's an enchanted world that even the beginning of the story, man, it's like, the creation story is people live in a snow globe with holes in it where the light comes through. Right. This is this sort of imagery of the ancient world that Genesis inhabits. Right. So that Melchizedek is just another one. I mean, think about the Marvel universe.
Right.
Every time they introduce a new power in the universe, I mean, how many huge powers can there be in the universe?
Apparently, there's
Marvel,
always another one.
Always another one.
Yeah.
Then there's the Eternals. Then there's what's his face? Purple face man from the Avengers. What's his name?
The guy who snaps.
The snap guy. What's his name?
Why I do enjoy Marvel. I'm wondering why I can't remember the name.
Yeah. I mean, I know everybody's screaming at us. They're saying the name right now. What is his name?
I'm gonna have to Google it because it's
anyway. There's always a new power, right? Thanos.
Thank you.
There it is. And so in Genesis, think about it, Marvel Universe. It's just the next sort of enchanted encounter, and the dusty figure that emerges is actually this king priest who embodies this whole sort of symbolism of what Jesus will bring.
So the narrative seems to assume that Abram has some type of relationship with this individual already. He's coming back from battle, wants to give him the spoils of war. And there's something that's interesting that's said in the text, how the king of Sodom, this is verse 21, says to Abram, give me the persons, but keep the goods for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What's the deal with that? That seems kind of interesting. I'm sure it's not human sacrifice is not necessarily what's being suggested here, because that's clearly against
what verse?
Verse 21 of Genesis 14.
Yeah.
And the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself.
Yeah. 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 I think that right there, what you, I don't know if there's deeper meaning, but what I've understood, particularly after the way Abram responds to him, is that there's a division of the spoil of war between the king of Sodom and Abram. At least there's an attempt. And there is a subtle strategy at work here from the king, demonstrating a little guile of, hey man, let's split this way and that way. And in that split, now there's this bond between him and the king, so that Abram's a bit of an outlier. Sure. People know Abram, but they also know that he serves Yahweh. He's this guy who listens to God, but everything he touches flourishes. I'm sure it has been told what happened with Pharaoh.
Right.
Right. So
out, hey, don't mess with this guy.
Abram's the sort of guy, like, he is touched by the divine. And so there's very much an attempt here, seemingly an attempt for some sort of political sort of affiliation, right? Mm-hmm. By way of sharing the spoil. And Abram responds very astutely in saying, nah, man, you keep it all. I'm only taking what belongs to me. I don't want the persons or the spoil, right?
Yeah.
He's very emphatic. I have lifted my hand to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I've made Abram rich, which is a very interesting lesson learned if we're following the trajectory of Abram in relationship back to Genesis 12, where he took the gifts of Pharaoh.
Right. It's maybe here Abraham is growing. There's a little bit of character development here that's taking place, where he's like, you know what? Every time that I've kind of like reached out on my own accord, it hasn't worked well yet.
Yeah, it's a little bit. Hopefully, that's a little bit of what's going on. But definitely, as I've read and as I've understood, that at least one element here is a political strategy on the behalf of the king of Sodom that Abraham successfully sidesteps. And then you have another political figure who emerges, who is different from the politics of the king of Sodom, who is trying to create these bonds of allegiance via material goods. The king of Salem just comes giving stuff. Here you go.
Here you go.
Here you go.
Bread and wine.
Right? Because, and then the pastor in Hebrews, like, it's absolutely clear that the greater blesses the lesser.
Huh.
Right?
Yeah. And
in that act, he's like, oh no, I'm taking a stand of superiority here over and against you. And if Abraham is one with a divine mission, because he's under the care of God to accomplish this thing that he's stewarding this promise for the sake of the world, and Melchizedek is somehow greater than Abraham, because clearly the greater blesses the lesser, then what and who is Melchizedek? That it might be even intimated in the text that he's slightly greater.
Yeah.
Right. And it's only later on, I think, when the author, the pastor in Hebrews, starts making these connections, you start seeing them. You're like, oh, this is Melchizedek is none other than the figure. It's a pre-incarnate Christ figure,
right? That
comes in like, hey, man, this thing's going to happen.
That's awesome.
So
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, man, the Bible's cool.
It's kind of like Marvel.
But better.
And you actually real.
That t-shirt, right? That t-shirt with Jesus amongst all the superheroes. And this is how I saved the
world.
Right?
That's a good shirt.
I think we've mentioned it before, but this moment brought it to mind.
There you go. Hey, thanks again for the conversations.
My pleasure. Hey, Justin, can I ask you one question, though?
What's up?
Why are you still wearing the same shirt that I've seen in the last couple episodes?
For those who have been astute in noticing that the last, 3 episodes that we've recorded together, we're in the same exact position, wearing the same clothes. And it's not that we haven't showered for a couple of weeks. It's that we're here in Hawaii hanging out and making the best of our time. It feels like the old days of the move.
Yeah.
For context, the old days of the move, we would shoot in person all the time, but we didn't live in the same state. And so when we would get together to shoot, we would shoot, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7 episodes in a day. They were long days, especially at the very beginning. We were reflecting on
trying
this.
to figure it out.
At the very beginning, we would shoot maybe 4, maybe 5 episodes in a day
over the course of like 7 hours,
and it would
just be
feel
so tired.
exhausting. And now it's just like we can get 3 out in the time that it takes
Emily to go get cake.
Did you get some cake, babe?
Did you get some cake? Oh,
Something
they got
different
something
than
different than
cake.
cake. Well, this is the end of the episode. We're gonna go eat something different than cake.
See you later. Speaking of the previous series of The Move, if you haven't yet, we have a whole season 1 of The Move. Unfortunately for our podcast listeners, it's not available on podcast. That kind of sucks. I understand. It is what it is. Some of the files were lost in the mismanagement of files.
Yep.
It's just one of those things. It
things.
sucks to suck. But if you want more and you're like, man, 1 episode or 5 episodes a week is not enough. Good news. Season 1 of The Move, the entire book of Romans is still available on the YouTube channel. It's Justin Koo. Search it for YouTube. It'll be on one of the playlists, The Move Season 1. And if you like this, I'm sure you're going to like that. Because
We'll put the links in the show notes.
do that. We'll make it easier for you.
Make it easy.
Check
Put
it
the
out.
links in the show notes.